Welcome back, everybody, to Event Tech Live USA Canada 21 and to the Omni stage. And for our next session, Building a Bulletproof Business, Avoid the Blind Spots. And I'm delighted to say that VP at Sandler Training by PSTA, Mr. Eric Thompson, joins Event Tech Live now. Eric, very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining Event Tech Live.
Good afternoon to you as well. Kind of excited to be here today and part of Event Tech Live. You know, given the events of the last year and many of our clients and businesses have had to pivot to really survive.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to hearing your session, Eric. I'm going to hand over to you and I'll see you a little bit later on with some questions from our audience.
That sounds great. Appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Over the next 25 minutes, we're going to try and dive into some common blind spots that we're addressing. Rich, can you forward the slide, please? That we're addressing as we really move out of that COVID environment. You know, how do I identify them? How to adjust and transform to succeed? Real quickly, some of you may not have heard about Sandler, but Sandler Training. Go ahead, Rich, and forward. Sandler Training is all about knowing to own it. And most people, they stop at knowing. They get a little bit of knowledge. They read a book. They took a course. Hey, I listened to a podcast. And that's where it stopped. They figured it out. But humans, we've realized they're not like that. They don't work like a light switch. So it really comes down to behaviors and helping our clients to put some behaviors around that knowledge, leverage it, and use it in real world application. So today, what I'm here for is to try and give you some ideas as to how to help your businesses. And as Sandler, Rich, you can move forward. In Sandler, we've got thousands of businesses that we at Sandler have worked with, and we've identified 4 classes of businesses that they typically fall into. And these categories from at risk, average, well-run, and excellent, we typically can identify what quadrant they fall in and how we can work with them to improve. So at risk, you know, they typically revolve around their leader. Without their leader, their business or their department, it's going to suffer greatly. Leaders in this group, they've really lost control of business and possibly their personal lives as well. Average businesses, you know, these businesses are really, they're doing well. They're doing well enough for management and owners to allow it to continue, but they're really vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they're potentially going to regress back to at risk at any given time. The third, well run, you know, these businesses are well managed by leaders. They typically are respected in their industry. However, these businesses, they're still vulnerable because as they bring more people on, they don't have a strong culture as an excellent run business would have, a culture of excellence. Excellent businesses, you know, these companies are always improving their situation and they're always looking forward. You know, for the leaders and for everyone else at the organizations, excellence is a way of life and they're constantly trying to move the bar. So kind of curious, when you look at your businesses, you know, you've got the Q&A in the chat there. When you look at your business, which one of the 4 quadrants and groups do you think your business might fall in or your department might fall in now? And as you ponder that, as you think about that a little bit and throw it into the chat or the Q&A, you know, what would that financial impact be if you were able to move that business to that next level, if you were to improve it from average to well managed? So as we talk about blind spots today and the 6 P's of leadership, hopefully I'll give you some ideas of some things to move to the next level. And blind spots, the blind spots that we talk about. Maybe I should take a step back and define blind spots just to make sure we're speaking the same language. I mean, everybody has blind spots. I've got blind spots. Just ask my wife. You know, she can pick them out in 2 seconds. You know, she's an expert at finding them, but I don't see them. So in an organization, you can have organizational, individual. You know, these all these blind spots, they can be the Achilles heel of leadership. And they keep popping up at one place to another in our organizations as organizations change and as they continue to grow. So as we look at the 13 blind spots, you, you've got to decide which ones are your blind spots. And they're going to be different for each one of us. And if you're like me and you look at them originally and you come up with nothing, but when you really open up, I had to really become vulnerable. And as I went through organizational excellence program, I realized that I started to have some of these blind spots and I had to do something to improve our organization or our department to be able to succeed. So here are the 13 blind spots that really we've identified working into organizations and trying to help them to improve. Of the 13, I'm going to take a deeper dive into 4 of them that I've been really working with my clients lately as we try to that post-COVID environment. So first, not having a process for hiring. When I talk to CEOs and they start complaining about underperforming employees, I got to take a step back and I've got to ask them, what prompted you to hire them? And typically I hear one of 2 responses. Let's say it was in sales, for instance. Well, they told me that they could sell. Come to find out, the best sales job they did was in the interview. Or maybe they told them they were good at accounting, they were good at marketing. Or the second response I get is, you know what? I had a good feeling about him. I liked him. It felt good in my gut. So for this blind spot, I've got to ask you, what's your process for hiring? If you don't have a process for hiring, this might be one of those blind spots that you suffer from. Once they're hired, it moves into the second one, improperly onboarding people. Onboarding is not orientation. They're 2 separate things. And if I look at onboarding, it's really a roadmap of success for a position. Failing to tie corporate goals to personal goals. 4th, not creating a culture of accountability. And 5th, no common sales language. Now, these are 3 of the 4 that I'll focus and highlight later after we kind of overview the first 13. These are ones that typically right now I've been working with my clients and trying to help improve their organizations. 6, not focusing on lead generation. Now, look, we all have great companies, and unfortunately, some of us do and don't have a healthy pipeline. And we know that if we don't have a healthy pipeline, we start to make bad decisions and we don't necessarily qualify like we should. So if we don't have a healthy pipeline, we're probably discounting more. We're pushing suspects through that should never have been there. We start investing time and money on deals that'll never close anyway. I mean, ultimately, if you had a healthy pipeline, you'd be able to make clients where you want to build business around for the future. I mean, we're here now, but where do we want our business to go? And what clients do we want as part of that business plan? Next, capturing best practices. Sounds simple, but do you really have a playbook? Do you know your best practices? Something that when we hire somebody, we can give them a playbook so that they can learn our organization, that they've got the ability to replicate and be successful with talk tracks that work, with question sets that work, so that they can figure out how to communicate with your clients and with your prospects. It's for all levels of the organization. Now, this might not be something that you consider a blind spot because maybe we've got people to help. But if you ask your team, what can we do to better improve? They'll start to share with you different best practices pretty easily. 8th, failing to train and coach the management staff. Now, we're surrounded with training. Heck, in this digital virtual world, now more than ever, there's lots and lots of training going on. But if we were to take an inventory of all the different training that's going on out there, you're going to find that there's tons of product training, tons of CRM training, tons of technology training. And we tend to look at managers and leaders and forget that they need some training as well. They typically aspire to the management or leadership role because of what they did in the lower ranks. But what we forget is some of the skills, the behaviors, and the attitudes and the mindsets are different, and they need to be different in order to succeed now in management. So this might be a big blind spot as we start to get more post-COVID and get more into that management focus versus the surviving focus. The ninth one, not building a bench. This is really a blind spot because as we look forward, mode as more of a reactive idea. We're always in problem solving mode, and many times my clients are consistently recruiting. They're looking for the best people to fill the positions, and if they're not open, they'll keep a file so that when a position opens, they have somebody ready to go. 10th, not knowing how to coach. Most leaders, when we start working with them, they typically are telling their team all the best practices and things to do. That's not coaching them. They're not coaching. Why? Because coaching takes time. It's an improvement process. It's a discovery process. If we think of the four hats of leadership, we've got supervisor, we've got coach, trainer, and mentor. And really, as a coach, we should be in coaching mode 30 to 40% of the time, coaching our team, helping them improve. And that's not easy to do. 11th, not sharing the vision that we have to implement. About what direction our company is going to go, we forget to tell them the why behind the direction. 12th, we'll table this one for a moment, fostering that learned helplessness. And the last one, not having methodologies or systems in place. Most organizations, they're made up of systems. They're made up of processes and methodologies. But if we actually dive in and ask our team, what are the top 15 things that we do on a weekly or monthly basis? I'm guessing they'd be able to rattle them off pretty quickly. But your follow-up question is going to be, hey, can you show me the processes or the methodologies that we use to follow those? If you can't find that out, it's definitely going to be a blind spot. So as we move through this post-COVID environment, the four that I wanted to highlight, these are things that I've been addressing with my clients pretty routinely as we're looking to continue our success. Rich, you can forward it on one. Failing to tie corporate goals to our personal goals. You know, goals, it's not something new. It's definitely been an important part of our life for many years. Most of us, well, hopefully all of us, have corporate goals, right? Our company has to do X, Y, and Z. But as an executive, as a leader, you typically have some personal goals that we want to hit in this particular year. The problem is sometimes we get too many goals and we forget to tie the corporate goals into the personal goals as a tool to go ahead and succeed in achieving those personal goals. So the question I'd ask, when you take a look at your team, do you know the top two, the top three personal goals for everybody that's on your team in your department? What are their personal goals, their personal drivers, and how can our company get them there? Next slide, culture of accountability. I've done dozens of executive coaching, hours of executive coaching over the years, and everybody's talking about, how do I create a culture of accountability? None of my team wants to be accountable. And they start to forget that leadership starts from the top. So the first tip that I can give you is you've got to be congruent. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you can tell people to be accountable. We can tell them all we want, but are we really sending those signals? I mean, inadvertently, we're probably sending the wrong signals. We're signaling indirectly that maybe it's not important, and ultimately we're getting unintended consequences. Nobody wants to be accountable. Everybody fears micromanagement. But the fact is, if we want a culture of accountability, first it has to start with yourself. Now, how do we do that? It starts with setting clear agreements. What is it that we need to accomplish? By when? And how do we set up those checkpoints along the road to make sure that we can achieve them? Ultimately, it helps our team to become more accountable to each other and to the departments and the leaders as well. The next slide, common language. When we look at the common language, I'm going to use an example for a second. And when we talk about not having a common language, it's a hurdle or a blind spot in many organizations because ultimately people have a different approach. So let's look at sales. If we ask sales to write down the steps that they follow from the time that they're going to prospect all the way to closing and maybe upselling, cross-selling, or selling additional products and services to their customer base, what are the steps that they would follow? Go ahead and write those down. And what I found on most organizations is every salesperson has a different methodology that they're following. It holds true in operations, in accounting, all the different departments. They tend to follow a little different, similar, but a little different approach to their particular department. So if they can't have that common language, that might be one of those blind spots that we're suffering from. Stops us from moving forward and having success. And the last one, learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. This is one of those blind spots that ultimately, you can go ahead and forward it, Rich. The last blind spot, this culture of learned helplessness. If we think about it for a second, it's a blind spot that ultimately is so obvious. But it shouldn't even be a blind spot. But it occurs because it's so much easier for me to have somebody come in and I can tell them what to do versus slowing things down a little bit and asking them, John, if I weren't here, how would you handle this particular situation? Hey, John, what might be the top 2 or 3 suggestions or ways that you could fix this particular problem? So you have to back up and ask yourself, does your team, does it really know the parameters of where they can ultimately make decisions? Where are those guardrails at hand? And when we look at our teams, we want to be self-productive teams. And there's a couple of keys for that productiveness. First, we have to give them permission. We've got to give them permission to go ahead and make some decisions. We've got to give them protection. It's not a gotcha moment. It's not a I win or you'll learn. It's a, hey, I'm going to keep you safe and figure out what lessons we can learn if things start to come off the tracks. And potency. We've got to give them the tools that they need to succeed in their position. So how to overcome these blind spots? These 4 have been the typical blind spots that I've been working with our clients on as they continue to plan for the future. So as we go ahead and adjust, you can go ahead and forward the slide, Rich, as we go ahead and adjust for the future, there's really 6 areas that I want you to focus on. First, planning. Rich, you can forward to the slide. Planning to adjust your plan as needed. Excellent organizations, they don't rise to the top. Leaders set a compelling vision. A vision for themselves, a vision for the organization, and then they define the mission, they define the goals and the objectives. They take a look at the environment around them and understand what it's going to take to grow. They create solid plans, they establish some solid benchmarks and really consistently review their plans. It's built top down, but ultimately the individual motivators and goals of the team help support it bottom up. So planning. Are you stuck in a plan or are you able to change and go ahead and adapt to create a new vision? Next, positions. You can advance it there, Rich. Companies in the top tier, when they look at positions, they've got a properly organized, a proper organizational structure. They've really taken time to determine what skills and what positions that they're going to need for success. The struggles that I hear from many clients is as we continue to change, we have to continue to change positions. Well, that's true because I want you to think about how things are today as is, but we're moving towards the future. Will it get you there? How we have things set up today? I mean, where you want to go 3 to 5 years from now, the 2B, what organizational changes need to happen? Maybe there's an org chart change that has to happen. Maybe we need to get an ops manager in to help some of the team. What should the responsibilities be? If we think about responsibilities for each individual position, what do the new responsibilities need to be for all the different positions for helping us to get to the future? So be okay with change. Be okay with change for success in the future. What attitudes, what habits do you want to build that organization around? Once we can identify those habits and those attitudes, now we go out and look for the right people. Go ahead, Rich, next slide. Great leaders, they strive to always be looking for the right people in the right positions. They know how to determine, who of the current employees are going to be a fit for the future. In that future, the vision of their company as to where it's going, and they figured out who isn't going to be a fit. They've got metrics. If you don't have a hiring metrics, that's when we start to get that hiring from the gut. My clients, I work them and help them to create a search model. The search model to help them hire and take that emotion out of it so that they can figure out what are the nice to haves and what are the non-negotiables. We take a look at the skills, we take a look at experiences, take a look at the attitudes, the cognitive skills, and the habits. And we start to identify in that particular position what are the non-negotiables for a successful candidate. So how do you recruit? How do you hire and retain talent so that you can take that company to the next level? From there, we start to look at processes. Go ahead, Rich, next slide. When we look at processes, companies have created processes for everything that occurs in an organization. And their leaders typically follow a step-by-step process for more consistent outcomes. And they expect employees to be doing the same. So what processes need to be updated? We're now headed this direction. More than likely, there's going to be processes that now need to be adapted or recreated so that we can be successful. And we also need to then recapture some of those best practices. Once we start to identify those processes, we start to look at what are some of those KPIs or perform metrics to get there. Next slide, Rich. When we take a look at those perform metrics, great leaders know that there's things that have to get measured. And then once they realize that they get measured, they get done. They master that management skill of because they start to hold people accountable for their behaviors. Those leading indicators, not the lagging indicators, the leading indicators. What behaviors we have control of. Well, let's take a look at sales for a second. I can't control the amount of sales I get. I can't control the amount of appointments I get. What I can control as a salesperson is the number of times that I ultimately pick up the phone and make my dials, the number of times I attend networking events, the number of times I do reach outs to prospects and clients. So as we look at the perform metrics, ultimately, these are the things that get reported that ultimately fit into specific job descriptions. And that way, as an employee, I'm clear as to what is expected of me. Lastly, your passion. As a great leader, you've got that personal passion to take that organization to the next level. Not only can we learn to spread that passion through the organization, but we've got to be able to help figure out how to make towards excellence, ultimately a way of life for ourselves and in the organization. How can you share your passion and what you can do to motivate others? So as you take a look at these 6 areas, you can go ahead to the next slide. I want to finish and end with 2 thoughts. You might already be really proficient at some of these areas. You're probably telling yourself, I don't have any blind spots, but really take a look at that. You want to first back up and do some discovery. We've got to be able to figure out the here and now and start to be humble enough to figure out what problems that we might have that are inhibiting our organization's growth, our organization's well-being, and our team's growth for success. Ultimately, the blind spots. I identified 13. There's more that aren't on that list, but you've got to identify your blind spots. And second, assess your business. Now that you've got a sense of those blind spots, it's imperative that you get a clear sense of where your business can go from here. What is that direction or that path that your organization needs to take to be successful? As I conclude, there's a couple of different ways that we could continue or start a conversation. Many times there's some questions. Many times there's questions that you want to take a deeper dive one-on-one. Rich, next slide. And for Event Tech, because our time was limited and we didn't have much Q&A, we're giving away a 45-minute complimentary business assessment. So if that's something you're interested in, you're welcome to go out and fill out the form to sign up for that. If you'd like a couple of tools, if you'd like the Blind Spot survey tool, a client retention tool, or top sales behaviors tools, go out to psta.com or psta.sandler.com/success and feel free to download any of those three tools, and that'll allow you to then do that. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can either take a look at that slide or shoot me an email. Send an email to ethompson@sandler.com, and happy to answer any additional questions that maybe I started to get you to think about business a little bit differently. James, throwing it back to you. Any questions that came up?
Absolutely. I've got a couple here. We've just got a couple of minutes left, Eric, before we have to wrap up, but let's fire a couple of these quickly at you. And the first one actually is from me. I was speaking to a friend of mine recently who used to spend a lot of time on the road, and the whole situation in the last 12 months has dramatically changed his travel plans. His reduction in travel is gigantic, but his productivity has gone through the roof because suddenly businesses were faced with no other option but to adopt these alternative methods of communication, at which point he was able to do 6 or 7 meetings a day instead of 3 because he didn't have to travel an hour or 2 hours in between them. Having that trust in your staff and having that faith in what tools we had available to us is something that businesses have had to adapt to very, very quickly, isn't it? And they've really had to put that trust both in the technology and in their people to use it.
And what are the requirements now? You know, as a manager switching to a virtual sales force or a virtual workforce, we have to manage a little bit differently. Something as simple as virtual meetings and other technology to help leverage success for our team. A lot of our clients, we've got a lot of IT clients, and they've done a lot of projects investing in that technology for their clients to help them have success, because it's not going to go away. People have realized that it's so successful to have 6 or 8 meetings versus 3 as they're traveling around. And yes, travel will still be there, I believe, but you're going to have to leverage the technology piece even more, I believe, in the future.
Trust to me is the huge word in this. And listening to your session today, I think so many business leaders had not so much a lack of faith, but a lack of trust. They wanted to see their staff in their office every day because there wasn't the trust level that if they weren't there, that they would be doing their jobs. When faced with a situation where they had no choice, people have changed and realized that that's not the case. And with that, they've realized that they may need to seek people with a completely different skill set than they were seeking before, because they now have this trust that they can work remotely, for example.
Well, and as I started the presentation out with at risk, average, well run, or excellent, there's only, what I found is 20 to 30% of the businesses are actually well run, and only a few handful are excellent. So many, as you said, they're dependent on seeing their people so they can solve their problems, creating that learned helplessness versus trusting them and setting up those guardrails so that they can make decisions for themselves. That's the way to continue that advantage.
And of course, the more decisions that your team can make, that frees up the business leaders to do what they want to do, which is lead the business, to drive it forward, to do new things, to find new ways, rather than having to constantly support the team that they used to almost babysit.
Empowering your team, the leader, time back. The only thing that people run out of is that time thing, because we can't create more than 24 hours in a day. So you're exactly right.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to listen to the session today, Eric. Thank you very much for joining Event Tech Live. Eric Thompson is the VP at Sandler Training by PSTA and has joined us today to look at avoiding the blind spots and building a bulletproof business. Eric, thanks for joining Event Tech Live. We hope to see you very soon.
Thank everybody for their time. Appreciate it. We'll see you, James.